Hello and welcome back to the SecurityMetrics podcast. My name is Jen Stone. I'm one of the principal security analysts here at SecurityMetrics. We're into our fourth season already, and we have so much back content. If you haven't seen our back catalog, go take a look. Topics on everything, and I think that there's a lot of value out there. Today's is going to apply to everybody listening. Super excited to talk about its risk. We're going to talk about risk. And the guy that I have to come talk to me today about this, his name is Josh Hyman. I'm going to read his bio so I don't miss anything. He has been a leader in the information security space for over 20 years after serving as the director of information security for a financial company and working directly with the executives to ensure impenetrable security for the organization. In his most recent role, he brings with him a breadth of experience and expertise in the field to Black Talon Security. His attention to detail and consistently up-to-date knowledge in the ever-evolving world of data security have always made him an asset to any role. Josh, welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Happy to be here.
And on a more casual note, Josh, you and I met because we did the cybersecurity PriceSec boot camp held by the good folks at Help Me with HIPAA podcast, and just said, yes, you've got this risk topic nailed. Come and talk to me.
Risk. Where do you start, right? I think that's the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And first of all, thanks for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to sit with you and chat with your listeners today. We had a lot of fun over in Kentucky.
Yeah, we did.
And having nothing to do with the bourbon, right?
No.
Having nothing to do with the bourbon.
Bourbon
that
aside,
didn't make any
we
of it
still
fun
had
at all,
fun.
right? But bourbon aside, we had a lot of fun presenting and listening to many different folks speak about risk and the different aspects of risk in an organization. I think one of the things that you and I were talking about before we started that whole thing was like that drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
Like that part of risk, and like it's the scariest thing in the whole world.
Yeah.
Like I think about anytime I sit down with a client, or even when I'm addressing like risk for my own organization, where do I start?
Yeah.
Right. And then boom, like they open the fire hose and you've got a million things to do. And like, how do you deal with the data there? And how do you deal with all the different aspects of risk? So I think this will be eye-opening experience for those listening. And maybe we can start with, I don't know, I like to tell stories, right? I think that's always like a great way to jump into something. I'll go first.
Please.
Why not? Because I'm here. So my first real foray into like, structured risk, right? Because I worked my career, before I got to Wall Street, I worked for a business where like, how do we address risk? I don't know. I don't think we did. I'll tell a funny story. We were in the automotive repair business,
Mm-hmm.
and so much so we didn't address risk that a guy's finger got severed while on the job.
Oh.
Probably because we didn't address the risk that a guy shouldn't be working on a machine that weighs 80,000 pounds by himself in the middle of a cornfield. And then when he was, instead of using blocks and jacks, he used the outriggers to lift the machine. And then when he went to put the tire on, he went to put the outriggers up higher so he can get the tire, and he put the outrigger down.
Oh.
And boom, his finger gets cut off by the flange on the machine. And like, as I look back on that, like, how did we not think about that?
Yeah.
Right? Everybody today in the world I play in, like technical risk is what I think of.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody misses that like it's something else. It could totally not be technical risk. Think of the pandemic.
Yeah.
The pandemic is a perfect example. Nobody thought that would ever happen. Well, we have to worry about the bird flu or something like that. Never.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, COVID, and like now we have all this risk we didn't really think about. But anyway, I digress, as I will all the time, and I think that's where my charm comes from. My digression, I think. So let's move forward though to formal risk. So I land on Wall Street and PCI, your world. Right?
Yeah.
I'm thrust into an organization that has to deal with PCI. They've never done it before. And they kind of hired me, and they were like, look, we started with this, but here. And like they pushed like these like mounds of paper. Do you remember You Can't Do That on Television on Nickelodeon?
Yes.
I think of that big, they had the big dictionary, and they would open it up. It was like that big. It was like, my hands won't even be big enough on the screen.
Oh.
And they're like, here's where we started. And I was like, oh my God, where do I go?
Yeah.
How do I deal with this? And especially with PCI, I mean, we could talk about healthcare and other industries,
Sure.
but like PCI and its prescriptive nature of how it addresses risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the one thing I learned really fast was if I didn't if I didn't figure out how to slow that fire hose down, I was going to drown.
Yeah.
Right. They're going to find me in the back corner of the office in the fetal position with, pages around me and, just crying. So I said, whoa, hold on. Let's slowly start to figure these things out and put them in buckets and categorize them. And so for me, that was my first foray into risk. And I kind of do that today with all of our clients or anyone that I'm engaged with, is take it down to a simple something you can manage.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try and bite the whole thing. You're going to choke.
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm talking too much. You talk.
No, I love this.
I never come up for air.
I love the lead in.
You talk too much, right? You talk too much.
Well,
stop talking.
What I find interesting about what you said was that it was a compliance related thing here. Do risk because of compliance, but risk, being able to address risk is so much more important than that. And it comes back to your original story, which was if you don't account for risk, bad things can happen. And so a lot of times, why are we doing a risk assessment? What is the importance? Why are we even doing this? And so even though compliance is often the driver, PCI says you have to have a risk assessment. As a matter of fact, 4.0 says you have to have targeted risk assessments. HIPAA says start with a risk assessment. Why is a risk assessment, why is it so important that risk assessment underlies so many compliance efforts, so many security efforts? What is it about a risk assessment that is important?
I think there's a really short answer to this, and it's my favorite thing to say to people. I'm not in sales, although they say we're all in sales, right? We're selling ourselves.
Yeah, that's
all
what they
day
tell
long.
us, I guess.
And right, I'm the worst. I can't ask for the sale. I don't know how to close a sale. But if I'm on a call, they say I'm very good at helping to close. I'm a good assister, is what everybody says. So my short answer to that question is, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it boils down to a risk assessment. Did I know? I didn't know that Johnny, and we're gonna protect the innocent here, was doing that out in the cornfields.
Yeah.
And if I knew that, then I could address that risk. Maybe I send somebody with them, and I hope that there's not two idiots out in the cornfield. Or, with two people, then I would at least expect that they would follow a better procedure because somebody else was there to help, right? This person was doing the best they could in the situation they were in because they didn't have any other way but to reach to move that machine.
Yeah.
So I always say that to every client and everybody I talk to about risk is, you don't know what you don't know. And I'm here to help you uncover those things you don't know. Yeah. And that risk assessment, that first building block, is going to help you uncover I've got a server in the locked server room. And this is another real life story. This was my thing. And we had supplemental air conditioning and we had temperature sensors. And that's all we had, because that checked the box, right? Our clients were like, if you're going to have a data center in your office, you better have some supplemental air conditioning that's separate from the AC in the office. In case the AC breaks, something else will cover you. And we did the temperature sensor so we could pick up on humidity in the room, because humidity, as we all know, is bad for equipment. And then I'm talking to a friend of mine who's not anything related to what I'm doing. And he had just won an Innovator of the Year award in his own business. And he was in the home automation business. So very unrelated to what we do. But his innovation was that he had put an entire home automation system in the basement of a home. And the basement was known for flooding. So obviously they blocked the system up a few feet so that it wasn't on the ground, but they suspended it. They did all the smart things. And at the time, this was probably 15 years ago, there was the company he was working with to do this automation had a water sensor. And they put the water sensor halfway between the floor and the rack. So this way, if it started to take on water, they would all get alerted and they'd have a chance to save the equipment. And he wins Home Innovator of the Year, and I win Employee of the Month, because I'm like, hey, boss, we can put in a water sensor because we didn't even realize that there's a risk that now we've got supplemental air conditioning, right? And we know what happens there. There's water contained in it. Boom, that thing lets go. Now we start filling water up in the server room, and we didn't even address that risk. I mean, maybe my humidity sensor maybe would have picked it up, maybe. But now I knew if I picked up water that I had a certain amount of time, obviously if I have a gush of water, probably not enough time. But again, you see where I'm going
Sure.
with this. We addressed a risk we didn't even know we had by thinking about the things in front of us, the vulnerabilities that exist in front of us. Where's my T-shirt? We should have shown my T-shirt.
Oh yeah. If you can remember what it said, we should say that. But what I love about this story that you told me is that risk is important. Doing a risk assessment is important because of the actions you're going to take as a result. So when I was a kid, I came from a very large family, and my mother made sure that we all learned how to play piano. And her big thing was protect those piano fingers. And so when we would all jump into, we had this big Econoline van, and of course we'd all jump in. It was chaos, and somebody would slam the door. Well, before anyone ever slammed a door, we always yelled fingers. So everybody jumps in, somebody yells fingers, we slam the door. So at some point, somebody had done a risk assessment. What are we protecting? Fingers. And so what is the process that by which we protect those? Somebody yells the word, right? And so and you can take these ideas that are very real world. We all do risk assessments all the time, and we all take actions based on our assessment of risk all the time. But for some reason, people get in a room and then we have to do our risk assessment, and suddenly it's either boring or frightening or too complex, or let's give it to the newest IT guy because, that's what happened. That's how I got into the formal assessment of risk. I was on the help desk and got told, hey, we need to do a risk assessment here. Risk assessment is its own beast. And yet a lot of times people in IT or the admin, some admin person gets handed it. Here, lead this risk assessment for us. And so, yes, we all can possibly do these things, but having a professional help us guides us through what you were just talking about, which is how do we deal with what we don't know? And I think, if I recall, the shirt that you were talking about was the risk of getting punched in the face. And so what is the threat actor? The person who wants to punch us, right?
I think the person who wants to punch.
And the threat
I'm looking for it. I think I have it. The threat is getting punched.
The threat is getting punched. And the vulnerability is not being able to block the punch, right?
Punch, right. And then it was like residual risk or something. Oh, here, I found it. Hold on. Can I share my screen?
Absolutely.
Will I break anything?
Josh, I would love to see this T-shirt. Somebody needs to buy me this and send it to me.
Here it is. I mean, it's real world. Everybody gets it. The threat actor is someone who wants to punch you in the face. The threat is the punch being thrown. The vulnerability is your inability to defend against the punch. And the risk is the likelihood of getting punched in the face. And the quintessential response to this, made up Twitter feed is, let's not forget acceptable risk, which is your willingness to be punched in the face.
Exactly.
A little humor.
And so I love that you gave that example, because so many times when we talk about risk, especially when we're talking about technical risk, these are ones and zeros, and it's very hard to in our heads say, okay, what are the technical risks that I can't put my hands on? But if you start equating things to tangible risks with tangible outcomes, then it helps people really start forming what are those risks and how do we surface those in our company. I know one of the things that you told me at the conference we were at, which I thought was really wise, was if you don't have the right people in the room, and that is like a cross-section of people, there's going to be a whole group of people over here that understand risks related to something that you're talking about that this group of people over here hasn't considered yet.
100%. I mean, listen, so to take it full circle with your statement on having a professional sort of drive the project. Let's call it a project, right? It's an ongoing engagement of risk assessment because risk never goes away, right?
Yeah.
And every day that you're in business or every day you're in life, new risks come about and you have to figure out how you're going to address those risks. But you're right. You sort of need that maestro who brings it all together. And if you don't bring cross sections, right, then HR has no idea what IT is doing, and sales risks have no idea what HR is doing, and all of these. And then what I've learned in my experience is as we get these people talking, and we did that tabletop exercise, and you saw as it went on, people talked more, right?
Right.
So you bring a whole bunch of people in the room. First, nobody wants to be the first one to talk.
Mm-hmm.
They want to keep it quiet because they're afraid if they talk, either they're going to say something ignorant, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's one person's fear,
That is
and the other is they're going to give themselves more work,
Yeah.
right? They're going to be like, if I raise my hand first, everybody's going to say, oh, that person's great at what we need. Let's make them in charge. So people are always weary of that. But then by like hour 2, if you can get the sort of rhythm going around the discussions, you tend to find out that all of a sudden all these people talking are bringing out all these things we didn't know.
Yeah.
Right? The risks that we didn't know we had.
Yeah.
Look, as professionals, you and I do this on a regular basis. We meet with a cross-section of different business types and business owners and people. But I can't tell you how many times I sit down and I hear, can I curse? Am I allowed to curse? I hear stuff. I hear stuff that boggles my mind, right? Like I'm told things and I'm like, what? Like you brought it to a whole new level of things I didn't even know existed. Right. So I think that synergy of those conversations is really what builds the best risk assessments.
Yep.
And staying focused. I have ADD, ADHD. I don't know what you want to call what I have.
Well,
I don't know. Hyperactivity, lots of cups of coffee, all of the above. But I have a hard time staying focused. But when I do these, I think it's very, very important to understand the scope of what you're doing and make sure you have a focused plan. Otherwise, what did I don't know who said this, but I walked into my wall and some isms that I learned from my days on the automotive business working with people who were not Wall Street type people. And one of them is a goal without a plan is just a wish.
Yes.
And I don't know who said that.
I don't know, but it seems like just a real common aphorism.
Right, and the COO of the investment bank put it up on the wall in her office, and I didn't see it the first time I went in. And then I sat at her desk. I'm like, "Oh, you took that from me." And she's like, "Well, it's phenomenal." And I'm like, "Well, it's true.
It is true."
And then analysis paralysis is the other one that I think people struggle with. And so I gave her my other one, General Patton, another famous quote from General Patton, and I'm quote unquote because I never know if I get it right. My wife says I don't know how to quote anything, although I have the male gene that allows me to remember movie quotes that I don't always get correct.
Okay, yeah.
But we do it. I screw them up, and then my wife's like, "That's not what they said." I'm like, "Oh, you're helpful." And when you sing songs, you get the lyrics wrong. So then we get into an argument. But it's a good plan today. A good plan executed today is better than a perfect plan tomorrow.
Absolutely.
And I kind of say the same thing when doing a risk assessment. Yes, if we did this risk assessment for 5 million days and never finished it and just kept going, we're going to have the perfect risk assessment. But guess what? What happened between day 1 and day 5 million? So sometimes you have to know when is enough, right? Go through your process, have a good documented process, look at your risks, address your vulnerabilities, address your compensating controls, and then move on.
Yes.
People, on to the next.
Yep. And one of the things I run into, especially in the healthcare industry, is I'll go in to conduct a risk assessment, and we'll analyze the various risks and do the write-ups. And in that process of analyzing and gathering that information, sometimes they'll say, "Oh, well, we're still working on that." And I'll say, "What do you mean? What do you mean you're working on that?" And what they're talking about is the risk mitigation. And my response is a risk assessment is a point-in-time snapshot of where you are. Let's get your baseline. Let's get the current state of affairs. And then next year you can show progress against last year's state of affairs, right? It's not, a risk assessment is not, hey, we're getting everything perfect and writing up a report. That's entirely not what is being called for.
It's like they're filling out their test as they're walking into the assessment, right?
Yeah.
Like they're writing policy as they're walking in with you. "Oh, we have a policy here. I just finished it. It's hot off the press." No, don't do that.
Yeah.
You have risk. Organizations have risk.
Yep.
Right? I always say this: if you don't have risk, and it's like in business, if we don't make mistakes, we're not trying hard enough. So if you don't have risk, there's something wrong with your business, right? You're staying too much in your comfort zone, and you can't be successful if you stay in your comfort zone. I learned this when we started a Black Talon back in 2018. My partner and the CEO in the company, who is much better at public speaking than I am. You got to see him present when we did our tabletop. Me, I'm good in groups. Like, I want to be the second guy. I don't want to be the first guy. I want to be the guy behind the guy. Or even like the Wizard of Oz, right behind the curtain. But he said something very profound when we started the company. And I think it's what takes people into leadership roles and separates those who are good leaders from those who aren't. And he said, every day step outside your comfort zone. Do something you wouldn't normally do. And there goes another one of my sayings. If you keep doing everything the same every day, don't expect to gain, right? Or you can't get something different if you don't try something you wouldn't normally do. I'm messing the words up, but you get what I'm saying. And he said, step outside of your comfort zone every day when you're doing things. And I think it's the sort of the same mantra. Like if you say, I'm going to sneaker net everything, right? So I'm not going to have any internet connection. I'm not going to have any local network. Great. So you have no risk on that side. But can your business grow? Can you make money? Can you be successful?
Right.
I don't think so, right? People would argue maybe, but I don't think so. So you gotta every day there's going to be risk. We've got to take the initial steps to look at those items and address them. I don't know how many, I feel like we're preaching. I feel like I'm tub thumping on a soapbox that because businesses don't do this. I see it time and time again. I go in to do a risk assessment with them. I'm like, when's the last time you did this? It's crickets.
Yeah. It's not something that is done on an annual basis most of the time, and it should be. This episode is brought to you by our SecurityMetrics penetration testing team. They do a lot of pen tests. They do a lot, like network layer, application layer, segmentation checks. They're very, very knowledgeable, and some of them have even won competitions at DEF CON. So you can rely on these guys to know what they're doing. Head over to SecurityMetrics.com, learn more about pen testing. Sometimes people will say to me, well, we do this for the HIPAA side of our business, but we don't know how to apply it to the PCI side of our business, or PCI is really prescriptive, but in HIPAA you have to start with a risk assessment. Well, yes, but that's not to say that a risk assessment hasn't been done against PCI security controls, because of the way I see it, and maybe you've seen something similar, is a risk assessment is a good way to let you know what security controls you should put in place based on risk. Well, in PCI, it's prescriptive because there are a few types of data flows that the PCI Council has looked up at and said, for these data flows, you need to protect it in these ways, because they've done the risk assessment really for people in a lot of ways. And yes, there's some different risk that still needs to be done specific to an organization, but that's why that's prescriptive. But in healthcare, it's so different. There's so many different ways to deal with people's information, to deal with specific data, to deal with systems. There's so many ways it can't be prescriptive. It has to tell you, start with a risk assessment, because the security controls that you're going to put in place are all going to depend on what is the risk that's related to it.
Right. And so I said, okay, we're going into a market that doesn't do risk assessments. We knew it. It was without a doubt. We'll dive in another day on a topic on that. So I said to my partners, okay, I'm going to write our baseline security risk assessment. We're going to start with our clients, right? And my partner said, okay, go ahead. I went back to my office, I grabbed my PCI notes, and I wrote this document. But because I came from a world where we did ISO and so 200 was no big deal.
Yeah.
And I said, guys, let's meet in the conference. I'm going to show you what I did. And we met there, and then they laughed. I said, what's so funny? They said, go ahead, try. So I said, I don't know what that means. I don't know how to try. I only know how to do it. They said, okay, go do it, and then come back. So I did, scheduled a couple of these, and I came back. And I had my tail between my legs. And they said, what's wrong? I said, they don't follow me. They don't know any of these things.
Yeah. And
so I learned quickly about how to be agile when it came to HIPAA, right? Because as you said, in PCI, it says you're going to do this.
Yeah.
Or let me say, do you do this? Yes, pass.
Yeah.
No, fail, maybe compensating control. Okay, you could pass now. HIPAA doesn't say that.
No.
Right? HIPAA says figure out what your risk is, address your risk, and make sure then you have compensating controls and that you do this every so often.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to do that at
Yeah.
first.
It's starting with something really hard. I mean, people.
It's so broad.
Yeah.
It's so like
exactly.
What's my scope?
Mm-hmm.
At least with PCI, like my scope is how many questions is 4.0 going to have?
Oh,
They know yet.
I don't have that off the top of my head yet, but there's
A couple hundred,
there is
right?
a finite number of questions. There's the same 12 requirements with the sub requirements. You know, they've added a few things and shuffled some things around, but you know what it is that you have to address. But HIPAA says, "Hey, what's your risk?" And people go, I don't know. How do I even find that?
I asked a doctor, and you know what that one doctor said to me? The patient doesn't die. I mean, that's my risk. I was like, okay, fair.
Okay,
That's a good one. Keeping the patients alive, that's a great risk.
That is,
or that's a great thing to address.
That is a great outcome.
So what are you doing to address that?
Yeah.
What are you doing to address that? And he didn't have any good answers. He said, I'm doing the same thing I've been doing for 30 years. I said, okay, have you lost anyone yet? Right? I mean, didn't you get where this conversation kind of went? And so I had to massage that to be able to figure out, and not everybody in healthcare is the same.
No.
Right? And like you said, so healthcare is not prescriptive because we start with the risk assessment. And I struggle. I still struggle. Like 5 years later, I still struggle. Not me, but I struggle with the clients.
Yeah.
Right? Some clients can't wrap their brain around the nebulous. There's companies give unlimited days off, right? Many companies do this. And they find when they give unlimited days off, nobody takes any days off. Yeah. They're afraid to take time off, which is BS. But what other people say is because it's so nebulous, nobody can wrap their brain around that. So if you want to give no time off, say they can take 5 weeks off. And then people may not take the full 5 weeks, but you're giving them something that they can latch onto. And I feel like for me, when I sit down with someone who has never done a risk assessment, the nebulous is very scary.
It is. Yeah.
Even more scary than bringing a PCI document that may be like this big and being like, we have to fill this out. Well, okay, I got to get through those 4 inches of paper. You know, I know that's going to be difficult, but I know what I can measure against.
Yeah.
As I flip a page, I'm one page closer to the end. And on the healthcare side, sometimes there isn't an end.
Yeah.
Or maybe there is. I don't know.
Well, it's hard to know what the end is, right? It's hard to know. Well, it's hard to know what the beginning is, and it's hard to know where do you start, because sometimes a risk assessment is about analyzing one risk at a time. But what do you start with? And so I guess that's a dead silence.
I don't know if you're looking for an answer, but I don't have a good answer.
So maybe that is a question we should ask today is how do you conduct a successful risk assessment?
So I guess we could talk individually how we conduct successful risk assessments. Yeah. I would venture to argue or hypothesize that at the end of the day, while we may do them different, the process doesn't differ much, right?
Yeah.
In order for them to be successful, we have to do the basic building blocks, right? We have to start with, as we said early on in this conversation, we have to start with the right people, the right group, and the right scope. And that's how I start, right?
Yes.
What are we talking about? What kind of business are we talking about? Who can we bring in from the business that can help us to address the questions we need to even answer?
Yep.
And then out of that initial conversation, right, we take what I do for me is I take my baseline questions in that risk assessment. But what I hope to uncover is sort of the cross-pollination of the departments inside an organization and let them learn from each other. And they say, oh, but wait a minute, Mr. IT guy, what are you doing to this risk so I always use the HR and IT, right? They typically don't always talk. And IT's thinking about all of their systems they have to worry about. I think payroll was one of the ones that came up during boot camp, right? And if you do like a business impact analysis and maybe your payroll system is hosted somewhere else, or potentially payroll is done on a spreadsheet on the server and IT doesn't know that. And now that makes that system way more critical, because if that system goes down and payroll is done every 2 weeks, I have to address the risk of how do I handle payroll in the 2 week span if I'm out for 2 weeks. So that's how I start every risk assessment, is sort of lay of the land, I think is the word I use, right? Bring all of my players together, formulating a baseline set of questions based on the type of organization and size of the organization I'm looking at, and then some dialogue we typically do 60 minutes of conversation between these business units to figure out are we missing anything that we don't know about?
Yeah.
There is one difference. If I do a bigger assessment, like big, I will start with some document request lists.
Yeah.
So I will ask for policies and procedures and other collateral an organization may have. Maybe they have in a big organization a previous risk assessment. So let's start there. Why do I have to reinvent the wheel?
Yeah.
Let's see what you were thinking about a year ago,
Sure.
right? And if it's one I've done, certainly I have the one I did last year.
Yeah.
So we'll use that as our starting point. But I think the question, if I understood it correctly, is where do you start the first time?
Yeah.
Right? How do you climb that mountain the first time? And that's sort of my experience. I'd be interested to hear your tales from the crypt.
Yeah. A lot of times it depends on what is the problem they're trying to solve. What is the purpose of this risk assessment that they're doing? So as I mentioned earlier, 4.0, PCI DSS 4.0 says you're supposed to start doing targeted risk assessments. And it's against things like this. There's periodically, you should check this device for skimmers. Well, what does periodically mean? Well, you would do a targeted risk assessment that says periodically means different things if it's only used by one person once a month and it's locked in a drawer the rest of the time, then something that is out on a desk that the public can interact with. Periodically is going to mean something different because those are two different risk scenarios. But even more importantly, when you look at the healthcare world, the question is it's a multi-factored thing. What is the information you're trying to protect? Well, of course, it's protected health information. But where does it exist? Do you even know where it exists? And sometimes that means sitting with people and asking them, show me how you do your job. What are the applications? What are the systems that you work with? Because you want to protect information, but knowing the applications it's in, the systems it's in, the service providers that are going to impact that, you start kind of getting a feel for the edges of what is it we're trying to protect. And then it's not just how do you protect the information, but in the healthcare world, you have to have it confidential, which is the protecting of it, integrity, which is also the protecting of it, so it doesn't change unless it's supposed to change, but availability. And then you've got, well, just because you have the information and nobody's taken it and done anything bad with it because you encrypted it, well, if you get ransomware and you can't access the information, then you've violated HIPAA, right? So that you have to be able to treat people that come in. You have to be able to give them their records if they need to know, hey, I'm going in for this emergency surgery. Please send all of my information to the emergency room. Well, if you can't get it, then that's a problem. So it's not just protecting the information. It's also protecting the systems that allow you to use the information and the people involved in doing the work, right? One thing we found out about the pandemic, just because information's good doesn't mean people can work, right? And so it becomes a thing that really expands and can feel super overwhelming. And that's when I tell people, we're going to start with just one of those things. Where's your information? What's the information you have? What is the information you're protecting and where does it exist? And often we'll kind of flow from there so that people have kind of guardrails so it doesn't become this, we could go anywhere with this. Let's start with this narrow view of it. We acknowledge, and a lot of times I'll have the parking lot whiteboard where when people say something that is beyond what we are specifically looking at the time, but they can't get it out of their head, like they can't stop thinking about it unless you write it down and go, okay, it's on the board. This is something we will come back to, but we're going to set it aside for now and stay focused on this. And so sometimes that's the thing about being a facilitator of these risk assessments is knowing how to keep people all on the same track, trying to solve the same problem, right?
I think you said it best, right? It's all psychology and people in everything we do,
yeah.
Right? And managing expectations and interactions with people. And I think to your point, staying focused is probably one of the hardest parts
yes.
of a risk assessment, and
yes.
not getting dragged into those scenarios, because you're right. I mean, I could veer so right and left
yeah.
on any conversation, but I have to stay focused on the task at hand to at least get through it. I want to add something because I think, at least again in my world, and I don't play in PCI compliance anymore. I like to say I dabble, only because our clients are many of them are small medical practices, so they get asked the questions, and like, I don't know, I feel like I hate when they ask me because I know, and I have to now tell them what I know, and I almost would be like, don't ask me, just do what you want. Like, I can't believe I even said that, because a single office practitioner trying to fill out a SAQ is getting buried under the weight of their own form, and so it's tough. But what I say to people on the healthcare side, let's talk about like a HIPAA risk assessment for a second, because it's not prescriptive, right? Because it doesn't say you will have a firewall protecting every internet connection. It doesn't go that far to say that. Continual improvement.
Yes.
Right? Just continue to be better today than you were yesterday.
Yes.
And ultimately, you will do more. You will do good things for your business by slowly reducing your risk than trying to go like this and grabbing all of the risky items. I'm going to grab everything I got and try and fix it. No.
Yeah.
What happens when you grab too many things? It all falls.
Yeah.
You just start dropping them. So I try to say to organizations, you have to work within your own abilities, your own parameters, and make sure to be better today than you were yesterday.
Yes.
I leave everybody with that. And even the same, I mean, you could argue that with PCI too, right? I mean, even with the prescriptive stuff, right? If you did good enough today, right? Just do better tomorrow. Whether it's a better written policy, or it's, okay, I've got a firewall, but maybe I don't have all of the security services turned on. Maybe I'm not doing deep packet inspection because PCI didn't tell me I had to do it. I think they do say you do now, but right, obviously that was probably an evolution. And so do better at everything you do, and ultimately you'll reduce that risk, and your risk assessment will look better over time. I want people to know, I want the listeners to know, and this is another thing I preach over and over again, the battles we fight on a daily basis, right? So in our business, risk assessments are a big part of our business, but we're also in the cybersecurity business. So I fight the bad guys proactively, and then I also have an incident response business that is there for when the pieces fall apart. And obviously these risk assessments are the base building blocks of building a good cybersecurity program, right? Building good hygiene starts with knowing what your risks are. And I tell everyone, your adversaries are well-funded and they have lots of time. Right? The two things that we don't all have here. On our side of the table, we don't have unlimited time. Our clients don't have unlimited time. Their resources don't have unlimited time. They certainly don't have unlimited money. So you have to use these risk assessments to make sure you prioritize where you're going to spend those resources, whether they be time, money, tools, policies, whatever it may be. Because if we had half the budget they had, we could probably do a lot better than we're doing, but we don't. That's that's the fact. No two ways about it. Companies just don't have the amount of money and time they need to do the things that the other guys can do.
I'm so glad you used the word prioritize, because that was the next thing I was going to bring up, which was a lot of times I see groups, they'll do a risk assessment, and they have like a risk or roster of all of the things that they have that the risks that come out of the conversation. But then they don't take the next step of saying, well, what is the likelihood and impact of each of these that we've come up with? Because if you know likelihood and kind of put a number to it, and then you know impact and put a number to it, you can kind of combine those numbers and come up with your prioritized list based on the number that you get in terms of risk for those. So by assigning a numerical value, you can prioritize those risks, and then that helps with the decision-making process on where do we put the time and where do we put the money.
I don't know. I couldn't have said it better, right? And I think most organizations stop at the prioritization, right? They tend to become, as I like to say it, firemen or fire people. They tend to go from breakdown to breakdown, or from fire to fire, and they put out what's in front of them, and they use the resources they have, whether, again, people, money, whatever, to address the issue that's burning. Right, or as we would say in the automotive business, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yes.
Right. So if the data center has a problem, and maybe it's not the highest risk to the organization, they're going to go fix that door when maybe they should have fixed the roof over the whole building before they worried about the interior door or something, as an example. And I think as any process matures, or anything you do matures, I think prioritization is probably the key to sort of getting past the I'm crawling through a risk assessment to I'm walking through one, to eventually running through your risk assessment, where you're able to address all of these findings you have.
Well, I think you and I could talk about risk for days, and I think we have actually in the past. But just to maybe give people some guidance on where to start. Let's say you've got a small or even a medium organization that has never performed a risk assessment, and let's say they're in the healthcare space. What would you how would you tell them to start this process?
So the first thing I would say is take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Right? Take a deep breath. The second thing I would say is hire a professional.
Yes.
To help you. Whoever that might be. Find the right person in business that fits your needs. That may be a big organization, maybe a small organization, maybe a single person. I think it's always, in my opinion, and I've done this in multiple ways in my career, outsourcing the service is very beneficial, because when you give it to, no offense to the name I'm about to pick, I have my characters. When you say that Mary, who's the accountant, is going to also oversee helping doing the risk assessment, guess what? Mary has to worry about accounting and doesn't really have time to do this.
Right.
Or, so-and-so in HR is going to do it, and it's the same problem. When you work with a third-party company to do it, you benefit from a few factors. One is accountability, right? We're held accountable regardless of what other task we have to do on our day, right? If I have a client and we have a scheduled timeline, I'm held to a standard to meet those timelines. You read it in my bio. It's my job to make sure that we stay on target. And I would assume it may not be your particular role in your organization, but I'm going to assume you have delivery managers or whatever the case may be to make sure that the client engagement is going according to the plan. When you do it internally, my first risk assessment took 5 years, right? And we never got anywhere. So hire the right person for the job. Scope the job.
Yes.
Don't bite off more than you can chew. So if you have let's call it a medium-sized organization, maybe start with a risk assessment of your IT infrastructure as one place. Maybe you do IT and HR, and then maybe you do finance, and then maybe you do clinical. If you try to bite it off too fast, same problem. You choke or you drop.
Yeah.
And then set attainable goals and stick to them.
Yes.
As I said before, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So every time I set weekly meetings, I make sure everybody comes prepared for those meetings. If we show up at meetings with nothing, you know what I do? I send you home. Yeah. I'm not going to waste my time sitting there. And I don't care if you're a client or I'm doing something internally. It's very important to keep on track with what you're doing. So I think your question was where to start. I think you start with the basic building blocks. Even if it wasn't risk assessment, the basic project building blocks. Yes. Have a good scope, have a good team, have a leader. Yep. So in my opinion, you outsource that leader, somebody who's accountable for the movement of the project, because otherwise this doesn't happen.
It doesn't happen.
And then I think we didn't talk about this. I mean, you touched on it, and I don't know what we're doing on time, so I'm going to keep going until you tell me to stop talking. And I don't have anything after this, I don't think. I'm not going to look at my calendar. I'm just going to keep going. I think that some people do this because they need to check that compliance box. And some people do it because they really are worried about the risk that their organization it has. And I think it's important to level set the playing field when I get into an engagement as to why are we here? Yep. Are we here to check a box, or are we here to truly improve the risk in your organization? And if not, I want to know that in the beginning. Yeah. Right? I want to know who I'm dealing with. Maybe I fire you.
Mm-hmm.
I say, you know what? I can't. If you're not going to do what I'm selling, why? Don't waste my time. Go buy a book or something and figure it out on your own. Or maybe we talk about why they're doing it for compliance. Maybe they had a breach and this is their part of their corrective action plan or something. And so I think understanding why we're there, what the goals are at the end of this,
yes, and
then having all of those checkpoints to make sure. And then and if you don't set attainable goals. You're not gonna. It doesn't work. It does set realistic timeframes. So many times we'll set like in the beginning weekly calls, and then slowly we'll go to like every 2 weeks because we need to do more work on our side. They need more time to gather data on their side. And I find like when you start to bring people to calls too many times, nothing happens, right? It becomes noise, and noise in what we do. Noise is terrible, right? We don't want to be noise. We want to be relevant, and we want people to be looking forward to the next conversation with us.
Right.
Not, it's my weekly check-in and we're gonna talk about all the things I didn't do again. So that's how I start every engagement for an risk assessment. I don't care if you're small, medium, or large. I think as I said earlier, when we get to the medium and the larger ones, we start to ask for more things in the beginning. And many don't have it. I've got large clients, and I'm like, can I see your written information security policy? And they're like,
they don't have one. Yeah, it's amazing.
What's that? What's that?
But but it's also okay for people to recognize if you don't have one, that is a risk, and it's okay to see that you have a risk. And then that way you can have the time, the people, the funds put towards developing something that you don't have, rather than just trying to rush and say, oh no, argue and say, we actually have this. Well, why? That doesn't get you anywhere. If you sort of have something, let's recognize the actual risk so you can put the appropriate time and funds and what any people, resources towards, putting in place what you actually need as an organization.
I was just thinking of something you said. So I think of like when you go to the doctor. I'm going to use another story. I love tell stories. And you go to the doctor, and the doctor's like, "Do you drink?" And everybody's first reaction, no, or a little,
just bourbon.
Yeah. How much do you drink? And then you're like, daily, weekly, monthly?
What's the right answer?
This came out. I was talking to a doctor, and the doctor got breached, and we were doing a post-breach assessment. And the first question I said to him is, look, that password that you leaked, wherever else you use it, go change it.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't use it anywhere else. And I was like, I don't care where else you use it. Go change it. He's like, but I don't do that. I'm like, go change it. I said, look, doc, it's like, and he was in the dental space.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's like me coming in and telling you I don't smoke and you see all the tar on my teeth, right? Like, don't lie to the guy who's going to help you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So sort of that goes back to exactly what you're saying in the risk assessment. Be realistic about what you have. It's okay to do nothing.
Yeah.
As long as you own that you do nothing, and now you do more tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's important to be very transparent in those things when you're doing the risk assessment, and to, if you're a business leader, to provide a space where people can say, we have a risk here. Because if you have risks but people are afraid to say it, then that's pretty bad. That means things are not going to get fixed, and things go downhill pretty quickly. So just being open about it is a pretty critical point. So, well, gosh, thank you for your stories. This has been really helpful, and I really enjoy talking to you. I'm sure that our listeners will find this valuable as well.
Thank you for having me.
All right. You take care.
Take care.
Thanks for watching. To watch more episodes of SecurityMetrics podcast, click on the box on the left. If you prefer to listen to this podcast, it's available on all your favorite podcast platforms. See you on the slopes.